So welcome to this week's episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name is Sol.
I'm Jamie.
This week we have on Christian, and Christian is a good friend of mine out in Bali, and he's doing some very, very cool things. There will be a lot to learn from this episode, as I've extracted and learned a lot from Christian myself, and very keen for you guys to hear a bit more about his story. So, Jamie, what can we expect from this episode?
Yeah, lots of wisdom to come from Christian today. I think the biggest three things that I'm looking forward to is firstly why he explains why intellectual curiosity is the biggest skill that anyone should learn in any career. Secondly, how his career is taking him from Australia to the USA, to Emirates, to Bali, to Japan and to Hawaii. And then finally, why you should never burn bridges in any relationship.
Yeah, absolutely buzzing to get into it. Let's get him on.
No, Christian, awesome to meet you, mate. Great to have you on. I've been looking forward to this one. I think from your voice note, the immediate question that came to my mind was, you've mentioned you've worked in a lot of jobs, a lot of different roles and a lot of different careers. What is the single most transferable skill, if you had to pick one, that you've identified from working in all those different careers?
Intellectual curiosity.
Wow.
You need to be, you need
on
to
that.
be, curious and just a willingness to learn. So I think, for me, I've always been like a little bit of a nerd. So I think, that curiosity element, like I typically get bored after about 2 years. So if I'm not constantly growing or evolving in a role or picking up a new skill set, I don't think it's a lot harder for people that don't really have that. So I know for myself, it's the intellectual curiosity for sure is probably my my biggest asset in that.
I love that. And as someone who knows you, obviously for anyone listening, me and Christian know each other from Bali. I guess that like shines through knowing you. But for someone listening, like just top line overview about what you're actually doing right now, and then we can get like fully into the story of how you actually ended up there.
Sure. So I started a consulting company co-founded a consulting company called Satu Solusi, which means single solution, about 1.5 years ago. And then during that time with my co-founder, we also decided to open a co-work space together as a second business within that. So we've just had our soft launch of Flow Co-working in Sanur, Bali as well. So they're sort of like the two high-level things that we do in Satu Solusi, or like single solution. We help businesses launch, secure, and scale in Indonesia. So that's sort of the primary thing that we do there.
Yeah, very interesting. I think one thing that Sol explained to me is that you've been on quite a journey to get to this point. So I'm keen to get in. I know you've got an Australian accent, but I believe like you've worked in Emirates, Bali, the United States as well. So give us a bit of a flavour of that journey. Please go into as much or as little detail as you're happy to, but keen to kind of hear about how you've ended up in this position, all the different experiences you've had.
Yeah, sure. So like I'm originally from Perth in Australia. Did my university there. I was originally doing a double degree, Japanese and international business, and then after going to Japan on exchange, I couldn't wait to get out, so I ended up dropping the business part because I wasn't learning anything of use. So I ended up with just a Bachelor of Arts and a Japanese degree, and I made the move to Melbourne, where I was employee number 4 at an organic food startup in Melbourne.
Wow.
And how I got that job is I'd been in an organic food store and I found this raw chocolate bar, which I just thought was the best thing I'd ever tried. And it's the only time I've ever called a company to tell the founder how much I love the product. And I think I was like
Wow.
21 at the time. And I'm like, do you have any jobs going? He didn't at that point, but he's like, if you're still looking in 6 months, call me again. And I called him again. Then he happened to be flying to Perth. I met him at the airport while he was flying up north. And 2 weeks later, I was on a friend's couch in Melbourne to go and start the startup adventure in Melbourne. So did that for a couple of years. As employee number 4, sort of helping out with chocolate manufacturing and a whole bunch of things at the start. But because of my background with business and stuff at university, the goal was to sort of grow me into a sales and marketing role. And this was sort of like at the very early stages of it's like e-commerce in 2008 or 9. So I was like updating random HTML codes and manually processing credit cards as they were sort of coming through. And we sort of helped grow that business both online and through physical distribution around Australia. So I was able to help grow that from like a $60,000 a year business to sort of $2 million of annual revenue over 2 years. And I launched it in 5 markets as well. So it was a pretty sweet sort of first job off the bat. While I was doing that, like after 2 years, as I said, I got that sort of 2-year itch and I'm like, well, what's next? Didn't really know much about equity or anything at that point, so I'd never negotiated equity. I was just a salaried employee, and I was like, I feel like there might be more. But I felt a longing to sort of head back to Japan after my exchange. So I ended up moving to Japan, and then for that year while I was in Japan, I gave modelling and TV a crack, and ended up doing that while I was there. Things were going great, and that was going well, and I was booking more work at that point. And then the Fukushima accident happened, the tsunami happened, and wiped out all of that. The economy kind of tanked, so I ended up back in Australia, jobless and destitute, not knowing really what I should do.
I had no idea about the
Melbourne.
modelling.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I completely skipped over that. That's a gem that I didn't know about.
Yeah, as I said, I've done so many random things. I also did some like raw food catering and stuff that I was there. I was just willing to like dabble and try stuff, so it was pretty sweet. And then when I got back to Australia, like while I was in Melbourne in that organic food company as well, I decided that I wanted to learn about fitness so I could give health advice as a personal trainer. So I went and got my PT qualification while I was in Australia. Didn't think I'd use it. Then after coming back after Fukushima, there was a job at Virgin Active in Sydney that had opened up, so I ended up getting hired as a personal trainer. So I worked there for about a year, was doing PT. I also got qualified in like yoga and Pilates at the time as well, so got a pretty good rounding in all sort of things, health and fitness at that point. But one thing I will say about the fitness industry is I have never worked so hard to make so little in my entire life. And at that stage, the contract that you'd sort of sign is Virgin Active would take sort of like 2/3 of what your clients paid you, and you got no holiday pay or sick leave. So, I'd get $60 for a 45-minute session. I think of that, I got $23. So I was just like nose to the grindstone, in the gym like 60 to 80 hours a week trying to afford Sydney living.
Wow.
Managed to do it for a year, burnt out, was just sort of done.
Great.
Ended up going and recovering at my grandparents' place for a few months. They live 3 hours south of Sydney in this beautiful beach town. So had a little bit of savings after that point, and then I decided I wanted to travel. And I'm like, what's the sort of best way of traveling? And I was like, I didn't want to fly for an Aussie airline because they only had a few destinations. So I'm like looking at the different airlines, and I'm like, I had a friend that was at Emirates, and that looked pretty awesome. So I'm like, I'm going to apply for Emirates. I think I'd already applied at that stage 2 different times before, and I'd been rejected. I'd gotten through to sort of like the final interview the first time, changed my tack the second time because they don't tell you why you didn't get the job, and the second time didn't go nearly as far, and then the third time I'd managed to land the job. So after being at my grandparents for that amount of time, I'd been shortlisted and told that I would have a job, but they didn't give me a joining date, and I think I'd been on hold for like 4 months, so I ended up travelling to the US, and went to Hawaii, and then spent some time in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and made a whole bunch of friends that worked in tech, so like Facebook, Google, and all of that sort of thing at that point. This is like 2013-ish. And that got me really interested in sort of like technology and that sort of thing. So I was actually, even while I was waiting for Emirates, I'd sort of been figuring out if I could get something there. Didn't end up going that way. Got the calls for Emirates, so came back, and then moved to Dubai in August of 2013, and then so started my career at the airline. Was my original intent, like my dream was never to be a flight attendant. It was to travel. And their network's crazy, like almost 200 countries or 200 destinations across like dozens of countries. So it was a really great way to travel and see the world. But one thing I'd never considered like a career in aviation until I got inside. And I think I might have told Sol this. It's airlines are like so complex, and there's so much that goes on. So for like a nerd, there is just so much that you can learn. There are like so many different different things that you can explore. So. One of the things that I did very early on is I just started hitting up random managers, so my cabin crew manager, and I would go and have random meetings and just ask to be put on different projects across the business. So I was very lucky to be able to get exposed to like a whole bunch of stuff. I did stuff around crew performance, to like galley packing and loading and optimization. We were able to like remove 80 kilos of stuff off the 380 galley, which was saving them, like, it was a couple of $1 million in fuel a year across the fleet. So
Wow.
like different things like that, reducing crew incidents of injuries because of how we reorganized the loading. Galley service got sped up. So I didn't know that there was like consulting was ever an industry at that time, but I think I was sort of taking a consulting mindset into a lot of the stuff that I'd done in the airline. And because I was always the one putting my hand up for stuff, it just sort of started to open up opportunities. So I ended up flying for 4 years, and I'd been trying to get a full-time job in corporate, but there'd been some political headwinds on the crew side, whereas, and things I think might have shifted a little bit now, thanks to probably a lot of the stuff that I'd sort of pushed through. But some of the senior leadership at Emirates didn't think particularly highly of cabin crew and didn't think they had any skills they could contribute to other parts of the business. So I'd personally, according to someone in the senior leadership team on the crew side, had been told that someone at the sea level had blocked personally me being able to come over and be seconded into a full-time ground role on the commercial aviation side. But that didn't stop me. So during that time, I sort of kept sending like one-page business improvement ideas. I managed to get a meeting with the chief commercial officer of the airline, which was amazing. Like, I think he was just so curious as to why this cabin crew, like one of 30,000 crew, had like sent him business ideas. So I was able to sort of like network within that. And the woman who ended up giving me a chance, she'd been a passenger on my flight at 3 different times, and she was the VP of pricing and Interline and Emirates Sky Cargo. And yeah, we'd sort of hit it off. I got her number, had sent her through a couple of ideas and that sort of stuff. And she affectionately called me her stalker because I'd like go and, just sort of pop in and hang out at the office. But sort of 4 years in, when I was ready to leave the airline, because I think I was like 32 at the time, I'm like, I'm going to get stuck flying and being a flight attendant if I don't go and get a real job. So I really felt the pressure was on, and nothing I'd been doing had been able to get me into that. And she was, and when I was telling her my situation, she's like, all right, I've got this like mid-level manager job. You're probably not going to get it, but I'll shortlist you for the interview process, just so you can get some experience. I'm like, perfect, awesome. So I ended up getting shortlisted for this, and they had like a math and numeracy test, and then we had to do like a business case presentation, and then we had like a 4-on-1 interview. It was like a really full-on interview process, and it turns out I got the highest score in the math and numeracy test of all of these people that have been working in cargo for the longest period of time. My business case crushed, apparently, relative to the other people who'd been working in cargo, and we had like an hour to put that together. And then I really did well in the 4-on-1 interview, so I ended up going from being a flight attendant to like a mid-level manager in the pricing team of Emirates Sky Cargo, which is a $4 billion cargo operation alone. So it was a massive, world's largest cargo airline at the time, in the pricing team. And that then opened up, essentially, it was that her taking just the chance on me is sort of like what opened up my career to then eventually leading to where it now. Got into that. She hired at the same time, so the guy that I ended up reporting into, he was the ex-head of commercial strategy at Virgin Australia from the passenger side. Super bright, super awesome, hilarious guy, probably one of the best bosses I've ever had. And because I was in the pricing team, I was also managing the airline partnerships. And we were undergoing a massive digital transformation in cargo at the time. We were implementing Salesforce as well as looking at some new pricing engines and different bits and pieces. He encouraged me to look into Salesforce. So I ended up going and getting my Salesforce certification to help with the implementation. And after being in that role for 4 months, I was originally hired to put the pricing policies and procedures together for the airline. I rolled that out across all 190 stations. And once that was done, it was sort of like a BAU thing. I then ended up getting deployed on special projects. So I learned all about business process mapping, technology implementations, UAT testing. I put together pricing decision support dashboards because I was able to connect APIs. I taught myself analytics and stuff in that role. And just, they pretty much gave me free rein to do whatever I want, because whenever they let me play, I'd always come up with something fun that was an interesting thing. So I did that for 2 years. And that was on the cargo side. And then there was this role that opened up in Hawaii at Hawaiian Airlines, and it was a director of alliances and joint ventures role. So that was a pretty big jump salary-wise and responsibility-wise, and that was on the passenger side. And my boss at the time was like, yeah, mate, you'd be crazy not to do it. And the interesting thing about that was, so they were looking for someone that had airline partnership experience, which I'd got at Emirates, but then they also needed a Japanese speaker because my primary responsibility was for managing the Japan Airlines joint venture, and I happened to speak Japanese. So it was like they'd written the JD for me, applied for the job, got that, then moved to Hawaii. So did that for 2 years, but it was during the pandemic, so had some wins. My boss at the time had left, so I ended up taking over the whole partner airline portfolio while he was gone. Also reporting into a great MD, and we also implemented Salesforce at Hawaiian Airlines while I was there as well, so it's another thing. And then when that was coming to an end due to COVID, I'm sort of like, I really like technology, and I was like, it'd be great to give consulting a crack, and because I'd sort of seen it, and I like working with people and solving business problems. So I just randomly started hitting up people on LinkedIn in Perth, and I hit someone up in the human capital team, sort of seeing if they had any jobs, because I thought she was sort of like recruitment. Turns out she wasn't, but I was sort of telling her a bit about my profile with Salesforce. In Perth, there's not a huge amount of Salesforce talent, and she ended up putting me in touch with the partner of Perth Deloitte Digital. Had an interview with him, and then was able to get direct entry as a manager into Deloitte Digital. So I joined Deloitte Digital, went into their consulting team, ended up very quickly on some really high visibility projects between Deloitte Australia and Deloitte Japan, with a large bank digital transformation project working along digital customer. Got exposure to some of the alliances stuff, and was sort of working with a team between Melbourne and Sydney. Did that for a year. Also got some work in universities in the education sector while I was there. But sort of, again, that 2-year itch was sort of looking for promotion, but there wasn't much happening that way. And I ended up coming to Bali in that time. And I was working remotely, and I'm like, Bali seemed great. I'd never been here before. I'd always had like an aversion to it because I thought it was a place that bogan Australians went to. And then I'm like, I have judged this place really harshly and really wrongly. Just fell in love with it, and I just felt a real strong calling to come back. So I started investigating how I can come back, and again, just got on LinkedIn, started looking for entrepreneurs in Bali, as well as people that I'd sort of met at Nirvana, and then got put in touch with a guy who runs United Founders, which is sort of like it's sort of like a business group here of founders that are Bali based. And I was sort of telling him about my skill set, what I was looking to do, and then he introduced me to my now co-founder. And we got that introduction. So put some money into starting this consultancy. Quit my job at Deloitte, packed everything up, and moved to Bali. And that started the current journey that I'm on now. And interestingly, the core business that we do is it was so confusing and so challenging trying to figure out how to get to Bali legally and to do something legally, because you had all of these different agents and stuff telling you different things. I was sort of like, I think there's an opportunity here. So the whole point of the launch, secure, scale part of what we do at Satu Solusi is to help people from literally business incorporation and permitting all the way through visas, and then all of the compliance and the accounting stuff that sits there, and then all of the technology and strategy pieces that I'd learned at Deloitte sort of sit in that. So it's sort of like everything that I'd learned from the time that I was in the organic food startup, through what I did at Emirates, through alliances, through consulting to now, has kind of led to the point where I'm hanging in Bali and doing fun stuff. So that's kind of it's my career.
Absolutely love it, man. It's so interesting to hear, and like obviously so much to get into that. I guess like one of the first things is, someone's listening is probably thinking like there's it's hard to actually map that out as a career, like where you've gone, what the logic is next, but doesn't mean it's not logical when you were doing it at the time. If someone's like stuck in a career or a place where they're thinking, okay, maybe I'm not doing the right thing, or maybe I want to transition, how did you accept transitioning at each point there?
Well, for me, it was like a 2-year itch thing, and I'm just sort of like, I've taken this as far as I can, so if there's not an opportunity to move up, what's next? And that was very much my thing. And one of the things that I've sort of learned, I suppose, very early on is you can pretty much drop me in any business and I can create a lot of value pretty quickly, because I love hearing about issues they've got, and I love problem solving. So I think if you're looking to transition, always having, how can I create value and best serve the business, right? Because at the end of the day, they're paying you a salary. So if I'm asking for, say, 100 grand, right? How much value am I creating for the 100 grand that you're willing to give me? And that's the business case. So that's how I've always typically approached that career pivot. And when you're focused on the value that you want to create for them, if they give you an opportunity, it's a relatively easy sell. And then obviously following through and doing what you say you're going to do is important as well. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love it. I think quite a few people talk about it being like, it's like a kind of career trajectory thing that you should spend like 2 years at each one, and then ultimately if you move elsewhere you can often demand more salary, and I guess it's because of the business experience you've had behind, and I think you're completely epitomising that yourself. Like, you've had some unbelievable experience in loads of different areas. No wonder you're able to add value so quickly to everywhere you go, and it's amazing to be able to make that jump the kind of, I guess, a pushback on that some people either have the battle with themselves, or maybe it's kind of seen as a criticism sometimes of people, is that if you're hopping from job to job, is there ever a time where like you thought, oh, maybe I should show more loyalty here, or is that where you have to come in and be selfish in your own career path? Because I think people listening will be really interested to hear, how to what extent should they just be selfish and actually chase what's most beneficial to them whilst also providing value to the company they're working for?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I think it very much depends on the type of role, right? Because depending on the organization that you're in, if you're hungry and if you're intellectually curious, right, like depending on the business, a lot of them will identify talent early on and they will create opportunities for you. Now, within those roles, one of the things that I've seen is you can have an amazing boss, but then the culture can actually stop or inhibit them from promoting or moving you forward in spite of them wanting to, right? And if that's the case, then it's not a personal thing, because you can absolutely love and respect that boss that you work for, but they've gotten to their position because most of the time that I've seen people who are doing the jobs that I want, they've pretty much followed a similar sort of trajectory to what I've done, so they get it. I think if you were, say, jumping out of the job in 6 months just as they've kind of finished training you, yeah, I think that can be kind of rough from an employer side. But if you sort of look at, say, 3 to 6 months to get up to speed, and then you've generated 18 months of value far beyond what it is that they're paying you, I don't necessarily feel guilt in that sense. And if you've gone to your boss or you've spoken to your manager and you're like, look, I'm keen to create more value here, I want to move up, I want opportunities, what is there that I can do here that can add more value? You have that discussion too, right? Like, I haven't just left a job because I all of a sudden got a better offer. There's always been a conversation, especially in the roles that I liked, of like, okay, what's next for me here, and how can we work together to both both benefit from this relationship. I've never left a job where I've burnt bridges or relationships, especially with that VP that gave me the job in pricing. Again, I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I'd done now had it not been for her taking that risk, and then me also working with that incredible manager in that role, with him imparting that. And that encouragement, like, again, I still speak to him. We're still in touch from time to time, and it's like we've got a friendship that has sort of come as a result of that. So, if I had a role for him, I'd hire him in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? So I think I don't look at it as hurting the business or not being loyal. I think we as people have relationships with other people. If you value the relationship, you value the friendship. You can help those people out at different points in your career. You never know when you're going to cross paths again, especially in an industry like aviation, which is small, or even consulting, which is obviously niche as well. So that's kind of my view on it. It's probably not as black or white as you'd like, but
it's fascinating. I love the kind of approach to it, and I think from our side, quite a lot of our listeners are probably still in their first 2 years at a company, or maybe even like earlier stages than that. They've not started a company yet. So I think what would be great to shed a light on is two things. I think the one I want to go for first is, during that first 2 years at a company, before moving on, what is it that you need to kind of adopt as a mindset to actually make sure that you're extracting as much kind of learning and developing skills as possible? How can people go about doing that before they then move on?
So, again, it's how can I best serve where I'm working? And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's not about what I can get, but it's like, what can I give? And it's like, if you find something that you're interested in, and then it also aligns with their mission or vision, right? You're creating value for them. They're winning, and therefore you're winning, right? Because it might be a project that you've never done before, but if you're keen and hungry, and you will not stop until it's done, you will learn. You will learn by default, right? Like, it's people who are self-motivated will find a way to do it. And there's not many people that have that attitude. So, especially in consulting, right? Because typically every customer that you work with, every business problem is kind of unique. You've got to approach it with that mindset. I think that's probably how I would best extract learning. It's learning by doing, and it's learning by how I can best serve you and fix your problem. Now, it might not always be something you're necessarily interested in. Like, say if you look at something in, like, I mean, I wasn't particularly passionate about, say, moving boxes around the planet, right? But I enjoyed the pricing function and how pricing worked within economics to sort of, impact supply and demand across markets. You know what I mean? So while I wasn't passionate about the boxes element, that's a skill that transfers to anything. So understanding the economics behind pricing, and then how you would apply that to, say, a partnership, right? When you're applying that economic element to partnership, you need to figure out what's in it for them and what's in it for you for, say, like a beneficial win-win outcome. That's a transferable skill that you can use in any kind of job where there's negotiation involved or pricing involved. You know what I mean? So I think it's just it's finding areas of interest within what you're doing, and then just being appreciative and grateful for the opportunity to be there. I think that makes a huge impact as well.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, particularly nice ending there as well. But all of what you're saying there makes complete sense and definitely answers the questions. So then on to my second point, I think the other obvious question for people that maybe are then coming towards the end of that 2-year cycle where they've maybe extracted every kind of bit of learning they possibly could out of that role. They've scratched that 2-year itch, as you referred to it, and now they're ready to move on. How do they go about it in the way that you have where they don't burn bridges? What's the most important thing to bear in mind when they're going through the process of moving on?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important, like, what do you want to learn next, right? And it could be a completely different industry. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same industry. But if it's a specific skill set that you're after, so say, for example, like I use the data analytics as a thing, right? Like I didn't join the pricing team with data analytics in mind, but I was able to plug a BI dashboard into Salesforce because they'd left the API open. So I was able to teach myself that. It's finding those opportunities. So if that's in your current role, and there's an opportunity to be able to expand, again, have that conversation with your manager or the person developing you. Because if you take on more responsibility, in principle, right, the remuneration should be better. Now, if it's not an option or it's not an opportunity within that, it's like, all right, well, what skill set do I want to learn next? What role, what kind of company do I want to go to? And what's my motivation? Okay, so you've got to understand your motivations first and foremost of what you want to get out of it. But then, as I said before, first and foremost, you need to know what is it that you can give that company that you're pivoting or moving to. And if you've already had those conversations with your manager or your director or whoever hired you before, and those opportunities aren't there, provided you give them sufficient notice period, you do your documentation, you make sure the handover's solid. If you give them, especially just sort of going into say like more mid or senior level roles, most companies are expecting there to be say 1 to 2 months of notice period required. As long as you're setting up and handing over that next person who's going to say step into your role for success, and even making yourself somewhat available to that person in that role to make sure the handover is good, then you're not leaving your previous company in the lurch. You're enabling that person to be successful in the role, and you're respecting the time and the investment that has sort of been put into you by the management team as well. So I think, again, it's very much case specific, but as I said, if you're always looking at where can I create that value and just value those relationships, I think that helps.
100%.
I love that. And then just moving on to almost kind of where you're at now, which, you know, I think we both obviously align with. How has all of the advice and the mentorship and all of that like culminated now in a happy life that you're like, okay, I did everything right. Give the viewers a bit of a life is good right now, I guess.
Yeah, no, life is definitely good. I will say, like being a co-founder and an employer, right? Like so, being on the other side, and when you're bringing staff into the business and you're wanting to develop people, that in and of itself is a very different approach. So I think for me, I think I'm a really good employee because I'm always finding ways to add value, but I'm very glad that I've got a co-founder because I'm the type that, because I do get interested in other things quickly, having someone to sort of co-create the vision with and drive this thing together has been really helpful for me. So I would say that for me, starting the business with a co-founder has probably been the best approach. And because he's also, like, again, he loves selling and he's very good at getting into the market, and he's got a skill set that's quite different to mine. There is that complementary aspect. So I think having made the pivot and having done it with a co-founder in retrospect, for me, was the best choice that I could have made. Because I can tend to want to chase after the new shiny thing after a year and a half or two. But having someone that you can like co-create and say keep him on track from not going and chasing the new shiny thing and or agreeing on a way forward. It's almost like when you've got an accountability buddy at the gym, right? You know, it's someone to sort of like keep pushing through and keep working through. And then also too, one of the other differences is now, like when you've got staff and you've employed people and they're reliant on you for their income, for their livelihood, you know, they've got families, and also too, you know, they've got ambitions and dreams and things that they want to learn and things that they want to do. I do get a lot of satisfaction out of having people like that in my team, which has been good. But I tend to, I do have a little bit of a bias in that I do like people who are hungry already, that I can kind of like nudge in a certain, like you, Sol. Again, like you're hungry already, you asked the right question, you're willing to go ahead and do it. Love conversations with people like you, because you're going to do it regardless of whether I'm here, right? They're the most fun people to mentor and help, because it's just sort of like, well, this is what I did, you can try this, and then you sort of see if it works. So having those sorts of people in your business and just seeing people step up, like one of my staff actually, she sort of stepped up and taken on some of the more heavy marketing stuff. And I didn't realise that she was capable or able to do this. And she completely blew my mind last week as an example with a presentation that she'd put together, how she sort of wants to focus on things. She was asking the right questions and thinking the right way. And then by working on it with her, we're able to sort of refine it. And I've now got someone that I'm absolutely sure I can trust to take on more responsibility in this space. So there's things like that where you see them learning and you don't realise that they're learning, and then all of a sudden they come through and just blow your mind with stuff. And I'm like, yeah, this is what makes it fun. So that's
and fulfilling, right? Like super
Yeah.
super fulfilling, because it's like at the end of the day, working with people is better than anything else, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And the other
That's
thing
right.
too, I think that's sort of. Oh, sorry. What were you saying, Jamie?
No, you crack on.
Yep. The other thing that's sort of been interesting too is like going from, say, like a purely consulting-based businesses to actually building something physical. Two very different experiences. Like obviously with consulting, with people, there's not a huge amount of overhead, not a huge amount of risk, and not necessarily a huge amount of investment. It's about relationships, creating value early. Invoicing's good, margins are great. But when you're like constructing something, dealing with building teams, you've got 1,000 decisions that need to be made over minutiae that you wouldn't typically worry about, like what colour tile do you use, or what sort of edging do we want, what's the floor going to look like, what system, there's all of this stuff. But when you actually walk into a space that you're like, oh, I chose that colour, or yes, we worked with the designer and we consciously made this decision, oh, our customer experience that we've now got in this physical space is working. It's been awesome to take that consulting side, even when you are doing implementation, and then having that translate to like a real world experience and something that is tangible and you can physically see in front of you. So I really enjoyed that, and I didn't think I would enjoy that as much as I have, because I've always been about being able to move and leave a place quickly and easily. Like when you've got physical assets, obviously there's a little bit, the business tends to own you a little bit more, but there's also something sort of super rewarding about that. And that's been something that's been kind of cool in terms of a win that I didn't realise I would enjoy as much as I've been enjoying.
Yeah, mate, so interesting, and to be honest, like it's been super interesting getting to know that. I think there's so many pearls of wisdom in there for people, at the beginning of their career or in certain like pivots in their career. And love to ask you the final question that we ask all our guests, which is, if you could go back, and for you, I think there's so many times where you could go back and have that pivot, or maybe when you were looking, having those conversations with the Emirates and stuff like that. But if you could do one thing the same, one thing differently, and one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself, what would they be?
Oh, it's such a good question. Like, I think probably going back and reassuring like my 32-year-old self that was still flying, that everything's going to work out, and to just trust the process and to just keep. Well, actually, I suppose I did. I kept following. I did keep creating value, but just to not worry. Like the anxiety and the fear that I had, that if it didn't happen now, it was never going to happen. I put a huge amount of stress on myself to try and push things forward, as opposed to trusting the process. So I'd probably tell myself to stress a little bit less in that particular instance. Things that I would do the same. Absolutely focusing on value creation that is aligned with what you're interested in. I wouldn't change that, because it's as you will have seen for yourself too, Sol. Like when you pivot, you can drop you somewhere, whether it's selling this or marketing that, or understanding or working with whatever client. If you can create value for that person, you are always going to be in demand, and people are always going to work with you. And I think the other thing that I'd also recommend as well is be teachable, and come in, like, be enthusiastic about your job. You know what I mean? Even if you think it's below you. Again, I didn't love being a flight attendant, but I didn't let that show. I was never too good to be a flight attendant. I was never too good to pick up a tray of food from someone. And just being appreciative of the opportunity that you've had. I think that it's like the attitude of gratitude. I think that makes a massive difference to the types of people that want to work with you, and the types of opportunities that come to you. And I think especially when you're young or younger as well, like if you're in your 20s and you've got that youthful energy, there are typically mid and senior people that are just looking for an opportunity to mentor and help people reach their goals or achieve those things in their career. So take that opportunity to again breathe life and breathe excitement into what it is that you're doing, because that exchange with someone who is more senior that creates value for them and it gives them purpose. And most people typically love to share their experience if it's going to help people as well. So I think that's probably the other bit of advice I'd give people.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, some amazing messages. I think what's been really good about this episode is probably for some of the guests that we've had on, you're actually a lot more advanced in terms of the experience that you've had. And actually, I think you're also a really good testament to the fact that what we want to do on here is not just say that working in a 9 to 5 or a corporate job for a great big like global company is a terrible thing, because actually people will listen to this and see that you've gone through all of this experience, learn as much as you possibly can, and there's no way you kind of be in the position you're in now to be able to add value in all of these ways if you hadn't gone into those jobs. But not just having gone into the jobs for the sake of going into them, but clearly you've approached them in the right way. The message around putting your hand up, like taking on everything, being teachable, learning as much as you can from each experience before moving on has been beautifully put, and I think is really, really useful advice for anyone listening. So Christian, Sol did big you up in terms of what you've done in your career, and you've really done yourself justice there, so it's been fascinating to listen to. Thank you.
Most welcome. It's been awesome.
Okay, amazing episode. Enjoyed that a lot. Obviously good to catch up with a friend and get them on the podcast. Another Bali-based entrepreneur. I love that. The South Africans and the Bali-based entrepreneurs are taking over the podcast. But Jamie, do you want to start with the first takeaway?
Yeah, no, likewise, really enjoyed that one. And I think what's going to strike everybody listening to it is just the amount and volume of experience that he's gained over like his career so far. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway initially. I think the idea of having this 2-year itch of gaining experience is a really fascinating way of approaching any kind of career. So he just said that he will go into any career position that he ends up in. And I think for anyone listening, whatever position you're in right now, you'll be able to do this. Just put your hand up for stuff, be proactive, start thinking about things, and gain as much experience as possible from that. And if you kind of look at it as a 2-year time frame, just extract as much as you possibly can, skills-wise, careers-wise, experience-wise, network-wise, whatever it might be. Extract as much as you possibly can during that 2-year period, and then move on and do the exact same process somewhere else. And it equips you so well for the rest of your career. So it doesn't matter how many times you want to do it, you can always like develop yourself through that experience that you're able to get. So I thought getting as much experience as possible is a very big takeaway from what he was explaining to us there.
Amen to that. Enjoyed that concept a lot. I think, yeah, if you can extract things, like even my time in corporate, I know that there is things I've extracted from it, and I think he's the epitome of doing so many things, but also making them all beneficial. So yeah, love that, mate. My second takeaway is to drop the ego and to actually be prepared to do like things that people really don't want to do, and to actually enjoy them and be grateful, which he finished off quite nicely there. Like, you're never too good to pick up a plate of someone's food, and I think that's absolutely spot on. Like, it is such a nice reminder that no matter if you're listening to this and you're in university and you're, you know, having to do a side job, or if you're having to do the bitch work at your job, then, like, you know, no one is too good to do that, and someone has to do it. And I like that sentiment. It's just quite a nice sentiment, a humble sentiment to have.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. Really like nice kind of like heartwarming message that you can go about a career path in that kind of way. So yeah, totally agree with you. And then my final point was he used the phrase "learn by default." And it was quite a lot that he talked about around like how to like go into these places and how to learn as much as possible. But obviously there's an element of you've got to be teachable, but he also talked about being keen and hungry, and also knowing in your own head, having a kind of self-awareness of being like, what do I actually want to learn next? So whenever you're making some kind of decision about a career path, whether you're still in corporate or doing your own thing, you need to be able to know what you want to learn, and then you get into this default setting where you are open to learning and you make the most of any kind of learning that comes your way. So I think that was a really useful like mindset approach, however you want to look at it, that anyone can apply wherever they are right now.
Amazing, mate. Yep, spot on. I think that's really true, and I think obviously Christian a bit further in his career than a few people that we've interviewed, but at the same time that gives us some pearls of wisdom. So takeaways for there is learn from your experiences no matter what they are, be humble about those experiences, and also be as teachable as possible, and you'll mold into having a very successful career. So yeah, love that. As I said, very good to have Christian on. I've learned so much from him. Would definitely count him as a mentor of mine, and yeah, I've appreciated all his advice, especially on this podcast and away from it. So yeah, great guest, Jamie. Looking forward to next week.